I've seen a lot of things in 38 years on this bench. I've seen men lie so smoothly they almost convince themselves. I've seen women cry real tears over things they absolutely did. I've seen powerful families send powerful attorneys into my courtroom expecting that a certain combination of money and last name would function like a key to a lock I was supposed to have installed. I want to tell you about a case that I have not stopped thinking about since the day it landed in front of me. Not because it was the most complicated, not because the law was hard to apply. The law was not hard to apply at all. I've been thinking about it because of a man named Corporal Dennis Ray Beaumont, retired, who came into my courtroom on a Tuesday morning and sat in the plaintiff's chair and put both of his hands on the table and waited. And because of what a dashcam recorded on a Wednesday afternoon in the parking lot of a Home Depot on Route 9 that I watched 3 times in a row before I trusted myself to speak. In my courtroom, your father's seat in the United States Senate grants you exactly nothing. Not 1 inch of deference. Not 1 degree of mercy that any other defendant in this room wouldn't also receive. The young woman who came in here thinking otherwise, I am going to tell you exactly what happened to her. But you need to understand Dennis first. You need to understand what that truck meant and what that key meant and what was going on in that parking lot before I tell you about the footage. Because if I give you the footage first, you'll think you've understood the story, and you won't have understood it at all. Now, let me back all the way up. Brianna Lynette Cabot was 24 years old. Her father was Senator Gerald Cabot, 2-term Republican from this state, member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, which, if you know anything about irony, you will note is the committee responsible for overseeing the welfare of the United States military. Senator Cabot had been photographed at Veterans Day ceremonies. He had co-sponsored legislation. He had the particular kind of relationship with military service that certain politicians develop over the course of a career spent near it without ever having been in it themselves. Warm, public, and entirely without personal cost. His daughter arrived to my courtroom at 8:57. 3 minutes early, which her attorney had clearly insisted upon, because Brianna Lynette Cabot did not strike me as a person who arrived 3 minutes early to anything by choice. She was wearing a plum-colored sheath dress, not flashy, but expensive. Anne Klein, I think, or something in that neighborhood. Low heels. A single strand of pearls that were real. You can see the difference in the way real pearls catch the light versus the way costume jewelry tries to. Her bag was a Coach Swagger and cognac. Her hair was blowout smooth. Her makeup was TV ready. She had been coached and she had listened, and if you didn't know what she'd done, she looked like someone's responsible young adult daughter who had gotten tangled up in a minor legal matter through some combination of bad luck and misunderstanding. She had 2 attorneys. First chair was a woman named Carolyn Vickers, who had been in private practice for 19 years and who specialized, according to her firm's website, in complex civil litigation and high-profile individual representation. Carolyn wore a gunmetal blazer and a look of composed professionalism that I recognized from long experience as the look of someone who had read the file and was privately unhappy with it, but was going to do her job. Second chair was a younger man, associate, late 20s, who took meticulous notes throughout the proceeding and never once looked like he was going to speak. Senator Cabot was not in the courtroom. I noticed. These things tell you something. Now let me tell you about Dennis. Corporal Dennis Ray Beaumont, United States Army retired, was 53 years old. He had served 21 years, including 2 deployments to Iraq and 1 to Afghanistan. He had been medically discharged following injuries sustained in 2009 during a convoy escort mission outside Kandahar. His right leg had been amputated below the knee. His left leg had sustained nerve damage significant enough to require a custom-fitted prosthetic and brace arrangement on the right and a specific kind of orthopedic boot on the left that allowed him to walk without a cane on good days and required a cane on difficult ones. He had chronic pain in his lower back from the blast wave. He had tinnitus. He had been awarded the Army Commendation Medal and the Purple Heart. He came to court in the nicest clothes he owned. I know this because his sister, who had driven him that morning, mentioned it to my clerk afterward. Dark slacks, a Western-style button-down shirt, the kind with the piping on the yoke in a deep burgundy, clean and pressed. He had a bolo tie with a turquoise stone, Navajo-made, his sister told Wendy, given to him by a friend from his unit who hadn't made it back. He was a broad-shouldered man, thick through the chest, even at 53, with a wide jaw and close-cropped gray hair and the specific kind of unhurried movement that some veterans have. Deliberate, like every step is a decision that's been made in advance. He sat down at the plaintiff's table and he placed his hands flat in front of him and he looked at me and he nodded once. The way you acknowledge someone you're prepared to deal with squarely. He had no attorney. He had his medical records, his vehicle registration, 3 estimates from body shops, a printed copy of his VA appointment schedule, and a USB drive. The USB drive is the thing you should be thinking about right now. Here is what this case was about. Dennis Beaumont drove a 2018 Ford F-250 Super Duty extended cab. This was not a truck he had bought on a whim or for appearance. The truck had been custom modified at a cost of $11,400 through a program that helps disabled veterans adapt vehicles to their specific mobility needs. It had hand controls for the accelerator and brake, not for show, but because the nerve damage in Dennis's legs made standard pedal control unreliable and unsafe. It had a specific running board height and grab handle placement designed around his prosthetic. It had a lift kit calibrated for easy entry with limited leg mobility. It had a custom-made ignition key, not a standard cut key, but a key with an oversized handle, weighted and shaped specifically so that Dennis could turn it with the grip available to him on his right hand, where he also had some residual impact damage to 2 fingers. That key, I'm going to come back to it. The truck was also Dennis's medical lifeline. The VA hospital where he received his care, prosthetic adjustments, pain management, follow-up neurology for the blast wave damage, annual evaluations, was 31 miles from his home. There was no bus service that connected his neighborhood to the VA. He did not have family who could drive him regularly. He had tried ride-share services twice and found that the vehicles weren't equipped for his mobility requirements, and the transfers caused him physical pain significant enough to keep him home after appointments. The truck was how he got there. Full stop. On the afternoon of February 19th, Dennis had parked his truck in the parking lot of a Home Depot on Route 9. He was there to buy weather stripping. His front door had a gap that was letting cold air in, and he was trying to manage his heating costs. He parked in a standard space, not a handicapped space, because he often did this when the lot was less crowded and the spaces were wide. He went in. He was inside for approximately 22 minutes. When he came out, there was a long, deep scratch along the driver's side of the truck. It ran from the rear of the driver's door all the way back to the tailgate, 4 feet and 3 inches measured by the first body shop estimate. It had been made by a key. He had a Dashcam. The Dashcam was a Van True N2 Pro, front and rear, motion activated. It had activated when the motion near the truck registered. The footage it captured ran 4 minutes and 11 seconds. I'll tell you what was on it. But there's something else on that footage that nobody in the complaint had mentioned. Not Dennis, not in his filing, because he had watched it and had not known what to make of the end of it, and he had simply included the full file and let me watch it. First, the surface facts of what happened. Brianna Cabot's car, a white Audi A5 Sportback, her father's, registered to Gerald Cabot's household, pulled into the space next to Dennis's truck. She got out. She looked at the truck. She looked around. She took her key out of her purse, and she ran it deliberately, slowly, along the full length of the driver's side of Dennis's truck. Not accidentally. Not in a rush. Slowly. Like she was drawing a line. Then she went into the Home Depot. She was inside for 11 minutes. When she came out, she walked to her car. She saw the truck still there. And this is the part of the footage that Dennis said he hadn't known what to make of. Dennis had returned to the truck ahead of her. He'd come out about 4 minutes before she did, while she was still inside. He was loading his weather stripping into the cab. He was moving the way he moves, deliberately, carefully, with the prosthetic taking his right side weight and the left boot doing what it did. His back was to her when she came out and saw him at the truck. She stopped. She watched him load his bags for about 10 seconds, and then she laughed. Not a small sound, not a half smile that could be interpreted charitably. She laughed, a specific, sharp, 2-syllable sound, and she said something. The Dashcam audio was not perfect, but it was clear enough. She said, looking at his right leg, at the prosthetic below the knee that was visible because Dennis was wearing his work pants that day, which ended mid-calf height on the right side. Oh, that explains it. Probably can't even feel his own piece of junk. Then she got in the Audi and drove away. Dennis stood at the side of his truck for a moment. He had heard her. You could see it in the set of his shoulders, the way a person absorbs something they were not prepared for and has to decide what to do with it in real time. He put his bags in the cab. He closed the door. He took out his phone and called the police non-emergency line. He filed a report. He submitted the dashcam footage. He filed the civil complaint for the cost of the repair, which the body shops had estimated at between $2,100 and $2,400 to properly address the full length of the scratch, plus $600 for the day of work he'd missed because the truck needed to be at the shop during his shift. He asked for a total of $3,100. He did not ask for punitive damages. He did not ask for emotional distress compensation. He had not checked those boxes on the filing form. I noticed that. I'll come back to it. Carolyn Vickers opened for the defense with a statement that was structurally competent. She acknowledged that her client's vehicle had been in the parking lot. She acknowledged somewhat carefully that the footage showed what it showed. She characterized the event as an impulsive moment of extremely poor judgment for which her client had deep remorse. She said the word remorse, the way attorneys say words that clients have been told to feel. She pivoted to arguing that the damages sought were manageable and could be addressed through a straightforward settlement, and she suggested that a negotiated resolution prior to judgment might serve all parties. I said that the time for that was before the hearing, and we would proceed. Brianna Cabot was called to the stand. She was composed. She had been prepared. She said she didn't know whose truck it was when she scratched it. She said she had been having an extremely difficult week. She described a conflict with a friend, a stressful situation at work. She was not specific, and that she had made an impulsive and deeply wrong decision and was ashamed of it. She used the word ashamed. Her eyes were appropriately wet. Then I asked her about what she said in the parking lot. The courtroom got quieter. Carolyn Vickers did not object, which told me she had already watched the footage and knew there was no angle from which to fight this particular question. Brianna said, "I said something I shouldn't have said. I was already feeling bad about what I'd done, and I said something that was wrong. I know that." I said, "What specifically did you say?" She looked at the table. Then she looked up. She said, "I made a comment about his leg. It was cruel and it was wrong." I said, "Can you repeat the comment for the record?" She did not want to. I could see that. She said, "I said something to the effect of that maybe he couldn't feel the truck because of his leg." I said, "The audio on the dashcam footage is sufficiently clear. The words captured are, 'Oh, that explains it. Probably can't even feel his own piece of junk.' Is that an accurate representation of what you said?" The courtroom was very still. She said, "Yes." I said, and at that point, you knew he was a person with a prosthetic leg." "Yes." "And you had already scratched his truck." "Yes." "And after observing that and making that comment, you got in your car and left without identifying yourself, without leaving your contact information, and without calling the police to report the damage." She said quietly, "Yes." I looked at her for a moment. Strategic silence works wonders on people who thought they had prepared. Then I picked up Dennis's filing and I said, "Mr. Beaumont, I notice you did not check the boxes for emotional distress compensation or punitive damages on your civil complaint. Can you tell me why?" Dennis looked at me. He had been sitting very still through all of this. He said in his unhurried way, "Your Honor, I just want what it costs to fix my truck. I just need to be able to get to my appointments." I set the papers down. "I'll tell you what I've learned about a certain kind of person after decades in this room. There is a type of dignity that doesn't announce itself. That sits quietly with its hands flat on the table and tells you what it needs and doesn't ask for anything extra, not because it doesn't know it could, but because it has decided that's not the point. That type of dignity is very hard to look at when you're sitting on the other side of a table from it and you know what you did." Brianna Cabot was looking at the table. "Now, let me tell you about the key." Dennis had brought the custom key with him. It was in his shirt pocket, the breast pocket of that burgundy button-down, throughout the entire proceeding. He took it out when I asked him to describe the vehicle adaptations for the record. He set it on the table in front of him. It was not what you'd expect a car key to look like. The handle was a piece of dense rubber, dark gray, molded into a slightly flattened oval shape, about 2 inches wide and 3 inches long. Wide enough for a compromised grip, light enough that the turning motion didn't require full finger strength. The key itself was a standard cut blade, but someone had fitted it into this custom handle with a small set screw. It had been made by a machinist, a friend of Dennis's from his unit, he said, who had a small shop and had made it for him after the VA's standard accommodation key hadn't worked well for his specific grip configuration. His friend had made 3 iterations before Dennis told him this one worked. The machinist had not charged him for it. He set it on the table, and it sat there for the rest of the proceeding. A piece of improvised equipment built by one veteran for another out of a piece of rubber and a set screw and the specific knowledge of what his friend needed. I looked at it, then I looked at Brianna Cabot. She was looking at it too. I said, "Mr. Beaumont, I have a question that is outside the strict scope of this complaint, and you can decline to answer if you prefer. How many VA appointments do you have in a typical month?" He said, "Between 3 and 5, depending on whether I'm in a pain cycle or not." I said, "And the 31 miles each way?" He said, "Yes, ma'am." I said, "And without the truck?" He said, "I stay home." There was nothing complicated about what he said. It was a simple sentence, 3 words. But they settled into that courtroom the way certain simple sentences do, like they had weight and corners and you couldn't move them once they'd landed. I stay home. I looked at Carolyn Vickers. She was looking at her legal pad. The younger associate had stopped writing. I ruled, compensatory damages to Dennis Ray Beaumont, $3,100, every dollar he'd asked for. Vehicle repair at the midpoint estimate of $2,250, plus the lost day of work at $850. I used his documented hourly rate and the shift length he'd submitted. Then I continued. I said, "This court is adding the following to the judgment. Punitive damages of $22,400. The court is awarding punitive damages on its own motion because the conduct captured in the dashcam footage, specifically the verbal statement made after the plaintiff had already observed that the vehicle belonged to a person with a prosthetic limb, goes beyond impulsive property damage and into deliberate targeted humiliation directed at a service-connected disability. This court has that authority and is exercising it." Carolyn Vickers did not stand. She had been on the right side of enough rulings to know when one was coming that she couldn't move. I said, "In addition, this court is ordering 400 hours of community service to be completed at the Veterans Services Center on Halcyon Road. The defendant is to report to the center director, disclose that the service is court-ordered, and serve in whatever capacity the center requires. She is not to arrange or request a specific assignment. The center director will determine where she is needed." I paused. The center director is aware that veterans who receive services there include a significant number of amputees, individuals with mobility impairments, and individuals with service-connected disabilities similar to those of the plaintiff in this case. The court considers that relevant. The gallery exhaled, not loudly, but there. The defendant will also submit a written apology to Mr. Beaumont, handwritten, reviewed by this court's clerk for authenticity, meaning it must be in plain language, first person, specific about the events of February 19th, and submitted without legal review for tone or content. It will be mailed to the plaintiff, not delivered through counsel. I looked at Brianna Cabot. She was not composed anymore. Her eyes were wet in a different way than they had been during her prepared testimony. Not the controlled presentation of remorse, but something that looked like the real thing finally arriving, a little late, in a room that was not going to give her credit for the timing. I said, "Mr. Beaumont, the court is adding the punitive damages to your judgment. You will receive $25,500 total. I want you to know that the $3,100 you asked for and the restraint with which you filed this complaint was noted by this court. In 38 years, I have rarely seen a plaintiff leave money on the table that they had every right to pick up. That tells me something about who you are." He nodded once. The same nod as when he'd walked in. I looked at Brianna one more time. I said, "Your father is a member of the Armed Services Committee. I don't know if that fact ever crossed your mind in that parking lot. I suspect it didn't, but it will be part of how you think about this day going forward. That's not this court's business, but it is something I wanted to say." I sat down. Carolyn Vickers was the first to move. She gathered her papers with the efficient precision of a professional who is going to do her job all the way to the end of the proceeding, regardless of how the proceeding went. The younger associate capped his pen. Brianna Cabot sat for a moment after her attorney stood. She was looking at the custom key still sitting on Dennis's side of the table. He hadn't picked it up yet. She looked at it the way you look at something you now understand the meaning of and wish you had understood earlier. Dennis picked up the key. He set it in his shirt pocket next to where the bolo tie's cord was tucked. He stood slowly and deliberately, the way he always moved, He buttoned the top button of his Western shirt. He turned to leave. He didn't look at Brianna. He didn't need to. Senator Gerald Cabot was not in the courtroom, as I mentioned. I found out later from the clerk who handles the public docket line that his office had called that morning to inquire about whether the hearing was open to press. The clerk had informed them that civil hearings were generally open to the public. Senator Cabot's office had thanked her and not called back. The Dashcam footage was a matter of public record. By the end of that week, it had been viewed 4.1 million times across various platforms. I don't mention this because I think viral attention is justice. I mention it because Dennis Beaumont had done everything right. The police report, the civil filing, the USB drive, and the footage told the truth in a way that didn't require me to explain it to anyone. Here's what happened in the months that followed. The $25,500 judgment was paid within 30 days through Carolyn Vickers's office by wire transfer. No appeal was filed. Brianna Cabot reported to the Veterans Services Center on Halcyon Road on a Monday morning in early April. The center director later sent a note to my clerk. She does this when court-ordered service is involved as a matter of professional courtesy, confirming the start of service. The note mentioned that Ms. Cabot had been assigned to the Mobility Assistance Program, which helps veterans with limb loss and mobility impairments navigate transportation, medical appointments, and daily logistics. The irony of that assignment was not lost on the center director, who I suspect chose it deliberately. Good for her. The note, sent 4 months into Cabot's service, said that Ms. Cabot had completed 280 of her 400 hours without incident and that the center's clients had found her attentive and willing. The director did not offer an interpretation of what this meant for Ms. Cabot's character. She simply reported the facts. I appreciated that. Dennis Beaumont's truck was repaired. It took 9 days at the first body shop. His sister drove him to 2 VA appointments during that time. He sent a handwritten note to the shop afterward, thanking them for being careful with the hand controls. The written apology was submitted 6 weeks after the ruling on notebook paper in a handwriting that was careful and even, the handwriting of someone who has drafted and redrafted something many times before putting ink to the final version. My clerk reviewed it. She brought it to me and said, "It passed." I asked her what she thought of it. She said, "It's real." I took her word for it. Wendy has good judgment. Dennis received it. He told his sister, and his sister mentioned this to Wendy at some point, that he had read it once, folded it, and put it in the same box where he keeps his service records and his discharge papers. He didn't say anything else about it. There are 847 veteran service centers across this country. On any given weekday, they are staffed partly by volunteers, partly by paid staff, and partly by people who are completing court-ordered community service hours. Some of those people show up bitter and count the hours. Some of them show up and something happens to them in the course of being useful to people who need help. I've seen both outcomes over the years. I don't know which one Brianna Cabot is. She's 24 years old, and the 40-odd years she has ahead of her will answer that question better than anything I could read into 4 months of attendance at a mobility assistance program. What I know is that she sat in my courtroom and said the words, the actual words, out loud on the record. And she heard them the way you hear something when there's no echo chamber around it, when it's just the sentence you said and the room that absorbed it and nowhere to put it except inside yourself. My father spent 30 years as a public defender. He used to say that guilt is not the same thing as accountability, and shame is not the same thing as change. He said guilt and shame are things that happen to you. Accountability is a thing you do. You do it 1 hour at a time, one choice at a time, one person you look directly in the eye at a time. 400 hours is a lot of choices. I hope she makes good ones. I genuinely do. Dennis Ray Beaumont drove himself to his VA appointment the week after his truck came back from the shop. He used the custom key, the one his friend made him, the one with the gray rubber handle and the set screw and the 3 iterations it took to get right. He got there in 31 miles. He got back in 31 miles. He made it to every appointment that month. Fairness and compassion are not opposites. A spine without a heart is just a stick. The law is meant to serve justice, and justice on a good day looks like a man in a burgundy western shirt putting a key in his shirt pocket and walking out of a courtroom that gave him what he needed. That's all.